So, welcome, future champions. Some of you are already champions, and some of you may be interested in becoming one. Some of you may have had trouble choosing a track session and end up here. Um, you're all welcome, and thanks for coming. My intention is to give you a reason to choose or keep choosing to be a champion of the Erlang ecosystem. You may also inspire new champions, and at some point we may issue deputy badges. No schedule on that. But there will be QR codes in this talk, so if you like scanning those things, this is your fair warning. Okay, so what is a champion? So simply an advocate, but it's mostly a social activity. We're familiar with advocating for our technology and our frameworks. Convincing people can sometimes be challenging, especially if we only do it occasionally. Being a champion is partly about long-term, consistent effort. Even when we're not asking for anything, just reminding people that choices matter so that the next time it might be easier or more possible. So we do it at jobs, we do it in industry, for our projects, initiatives, and government, and also within our own community. So you might ask, why would it be necessary to champion within our own community? Well, here we are, I don't know, in total maybe a few hundred, but there are tens of thousands of people working in this ecosystem. We don't actually know how many there are. Getting more people engaged outside of daily work only happens when people champion that effort. We want more people engaged. Our community of people is an integral part of what's great here. Local meetups, coworker gatherings bring people together, but it's more challenging since the pandemic, and there are other trends that don't help. But being a social champion is a huge asset. So conferences like this create engagement, and it's important to have flagship events of this kind. We also need events that are more accessible, both geographically and financially. And in the past year, the EEF has sponsored smaller regional conferences, including, and I've forgotten a few of them, Gig City Elixir, Goatmeyer, and XMEX. We want to foster more, and we want to find models and formats that make them easier and less risky. So if you're interested in building a community around an event wherever you are in the world, I want to know about it. And this week, we are enhancing Codebeam with 3 side events. 2 are still to come. This QR code will take you to a page that kind of describes them all. The next one is the Berlin meetup is having a topic and social gathering after the close tomorrow. And then on Friday, we have something new. So I've organized the first, known to me, Beam Unconference on Friday, along with Alembic and BitCrowd. What I'd like to see and support is support for more small conferences like single track, single day, 2-day, across the world. Bringing our community together in person and reinforcing that sense of commonality, the common interest and goals, and to enjoy the experience of being together. This is also now out, which is Curiosum's Elixir community survey. If you're in the Elixir community, it's a great thing to participate in. It gives they release the results publicly. I have been working on a project at the EEF to build an ecosystem-wide survey, so not just Elixir specific. But then there are reasons to not be a champion. Even though there's a role for everyone, most of the time we're just not interested. Like, we like our technical triumphs, but our business interests are too demanding. We like the craft of building, and that's the part we really enjoy. And to be maybe a little stereotypical, we're not like notoriously sociable. So we'd rather avoid politics, especially at work. But technology is politics. Our most basic political agenda is to keep personally building things with our technology. Other people have other goals, companies, executives, governments, they all have agendas. As technology is increasingly business managed, and a public infrastructure, politicking is ever more important. Politics and access are intertwined. Before open source, when everything was expensive, it limited who could even be a programmer. IBM thought it was just creating a market for itself with the PC, but it was really seeding the open source movement by creating access. So consider a common story of company acquisitions and management changes. It's not uncommon that technology is reduced to the lowest common denominator in those situations. Sometimes the beam can be easily eliminated from the roadmap. Systems will be replaced or rebuilt with something deemed lower risk in terms of people or in terms of broadly accepted technology. A new CTO that knows nothing about OTP and has no stake in its use will see this as a clear path to slash it. It's not even a technology choice. It's not a technology problem. It's a business risk calculation. And it's a personal risk for a CTO to use something they know nothing about or will be called to account if there are problems. It might be about a few more expensive devs compared to a battalion of less expensive programmers. So it's a political problem, and it's a people problem. But it's also a power problem. So I just want to neutralize power because it's neither negative or positive. Knowledge is power. The polarization depends on how it's used. To function politically, to be effective as a champion, power is required, and power is not on tap. It has to be built ahead of time. It also must be used sensibly. Concretely, in a workplace, this means if we operate in a bubble, when others don't understand what we're doing and why it's important, why it makes sense, then we do not have the power or resilience to counter organizational changes. Find and cultivate allies. Build coalitions around shared interests and goals. Build a power base that has consistent influence. In other words, it's a people problem. Our biggest obstacles are not technical. Our path to a better place is not blocked by knowing how to get there technically. It's blocked by the will to do it. The quantum of sacrifice required, the distraction from things we most like to do, to spend time building relationships with people, to build coalition, to organize the efforts that get us where we want to be. So what needs solving? So early on, and I mean 6 months ago, I believe the problem to solve was achieving broader acceptance and awareness of our technology in the broader world. If people simply understood what we were doing, we would win them over. While I think that's still a factor, I no longer believe it's actually the most important problem to solve. The issue is us, the people already here. We've already bought into this and we love it and we want to keep doing it. The issue is we're not broadly coming together to accomplish the big goals that no one person or company can accomplish. Goals that may not appear commercially compelling on the face, but are an absolute necessity for commerce to continue. So the EEF is the only entity in our ecosystem that is configured and purposed with the doing of big things that we need. To represent our interests in regulatory venues, to act as our agent in building coalitions with others, to organize within our community, and to invest in our ecosystem. We are succeeding in these things, but we do not have the broad community support that makes it sustainable and to be ambitious. Many companies sponsor the EF, but it's a small fraction of the commercial interests that use the beam. The rest are using and benefiting without equitable investment. So this is just the way market economies work. And it's no different than resource exploitation of any other kind. Don't pay for things you can get for free and ignore externalities. We fit neatly into the open source quandary. Software is like science. If it's done behind closed doors, it moves slowly, and there's a lot of effort duplication. Open source has enabled the technology velocity we have today. Things don't need to be reinvented. Innovations and new developments are available for new purposes. Before Linux, nearly every major hardware vendor had their own internally developed or partially licensed version of Unix. Poof, that's gone. Berkeley Unix struggled for years under the copyright encumbered code they had from AT&T. It hamstrung BSD. While open source makes all this possible, it's also completely devoid of a sustainable compensation model. It's all ad hoc or absent. It's only when something becomes too big to fail or too valuable to leave alone that large companies start driving trucks of money and resources in. But that's self-preservation. Linux is a good example of what's become so fundamental to business models. It's why the Linux Foundation is the gorilla of open source foundations. Other ecosystems have similar dynamics, but the rest of us are exploited by default. So this is an imperfect diagram that attempts to show open source as a process. A lot of it is very feedback oriented toward open source developers. However, the point is that most commercial use is a dead end. Relative to the amount of open source used for commercial purposes, a very tiny amount of value comes back. My point is not that there's anything wrong with commercial use, but open source is mostly a resource for commercial exploitation, and that is because there's no mechanism that captures the real costs. There's no structure that acts as a toll for commercial use. So let's just talk about the Rebar 4 Kickstarter, for example, which I hope you've all heard about. And if you haven't, this QR code takes you to the project page. So there were 176 backers. 5 were companies. Now, they accounted for 26% of the funds raised. But of those 5, none are the larger companies you might think of. This makes me wonder, people see the value. Why would more companies not see the value? Why are we not talking about, or we're not even talking about that much, like 500 euros as a company pledge moves the needle. There are stretch goals like full integration of Rebar into OTP that would be a game changer. And I think this makes another important point. The amounts of funding required to do very significant work is very reasonable. Larger companies can play a pivotal role, but there's no mechanism forcing it, so it doesn't happen. Until now, that is. The Cyber Resiliency Act, the CRA, is a direct attempt to properly connect the supply chain, creating broad accountability for companies using open source software to be actively supporting the open source supply chain. The underlying fact is that open source is a systemic risk across industries and governments because of the lack of support, feedback to the supply chain. It's a risk because even small components can be the source of systemic failure and security vulnerabilities. So the EEF is directly involved in CRA developments. So our CISO, Jonathan Manchin, has been hard at work since the beginning of the year with funding largely from Herman Ultraschall. And they saw the coming need and led the funding with a simple logic that under the EEF, we can do the same work, benefit them, benefit the ecosystem, and create a pattern that others can follow, which in the long run means HU will invest less and everyone will get vastly more than they independently contribute. So taking a step back, this is all about infrastructure, often referred to as roads and bridges in open source. While the EEF is all of us, it is also our champion to drive infrastructure projects to build our roads and bridges. In much the same way that open source has an undefined funding model, the EEF is sort of a poster child for that situation. We depend almost entirely on companies in our ecosystem to fund the projects and initiatives. We do also seek funding of other sorts, but the base funding is from within our community. That's what's sustainable. We need a strong institutional champion, which is why I advocate for the EEF. It's why I've been spending this year talking about this, to bring clarity to people that we need to ensure that the EEF can be our champion. As a community and an ecosystem, we have a tighter supply of money and power that makes us vulnerable in this world. We've got great technology. We have a wealth of great minds and developers. We attract people that have been in the trenches. People discover that OTP is an oasis. But it's time we stop indulging in our own narcotic long enough to intentionally deal with the technology and business outside. We are not alone, not anymore. With the actions of the European Union and increasing business recognition that unsupported open source supply chains are a business risk, a public risk, a sovereign threat, that open source exploitation, that value extraction is creating systemic risk. And EEF is fully engaged in the CRA and is increasingly involved in open source politics and policy because fundamentally we are open source and we have the problems that go along with it. Part of our oasis is the absence of a large corporate backer. We are guided by our own organic community processes, not a fundamentally commercial agenda. It also means funding to sustainability is our responsibility. If our oasis is to thrive, our community needs to invest in roads and bridges. The wider the base, the more equitable and the greater the value multiplication we benefit from. It is vastly easier to be a fiscal champion, to enable the foundation to break the cycle of exploitation, to invest in our oasis so that we can compete, we can grow, we can turn outwards and champion the beam. Wow, that's the end of my talk. Okay, so it took a little bit longer when I practiced it last, but that means that there's time for questions, and I'm happy to answer any of them.
We have a little bit of time here before the next one. Again, for everyone who's online, try to use the swap card app, and then we will have those questions either here or also after the talk answered. Let's talk to the current audience here. So, who wants to ask a question to Dan? There was like actually one thing we talked before here, which you said like you have like 3 presentations of this, but each one covers a little bit different content.
Yeah, so this is the 4th time I've talked about this spectrum of topics. 4th, yeah, 4th. So there are 3 other talks. I talked at Gig City Elixir, ElixirConf US, and Goatmeyer, and they're all different. They all cover different parts of this whole space of our community and how it functions. And that means that I keep writing new talks every time, which is a little bit relentless because actually the conferences kind of come close together. But I feel like there's a lot in this space that is worth talking about and is worth understanding. And I don't think that it's something that most people spend a lot of time thinking about because it's really not forced to, we don't have to. But the social dynamics and sort of political dynamics of technology in the world and how we fit into it and how we can help ourselves is a really constructive thing to think about and to discuss like as a community. And the more people that get involved in the foundation, the more people that come to events and potentially have conversations like this, the better. So I know that I ran through all that material pretty quickly, and that's just the way it is, but I would much rather have a conversation about this than just stand up here and talk about it. So if anyone does have like any thoughts or other questions, I'd be happy to talk. Yes, Gus.
Aside from this event this week, online, what is the best forum for having those conversations?
Okay, so the question was, what's the best forum to like have these kind of discussions and not or online? So when you join the EEF, you get access to the EEF Slack. There are a bunch of channels in there. You can also find me there. But there's also an advocacy channel, there's a marketing channel, there's a sponsorship channel. Basically, you can, if you reach out to me personally, I am more than happy to talk with you about like any of these things and find a way that you can get involved.
Thank you so much, Dan. Oh,
yep.
We're running short on time, but let's do one more.
It's a small one.
Please.
Hopefully I got the point of the conversation correctly. So I understand when you talk about like exploitation of what's considered open source, right? commercial
Yep.
purposes. There could be like, you know, whoever's putting things out there as open source, they could be as, you know, open up and saying like, you know what, I don't care. Whoever gets it, they can use however they see it fit.
Yep.
And so I just want to get your input in terms of, because there's the whole thing of the license, right? Of whoever does think that this could be growing to many different branching. Is that a way of starting to control whoever gets its hands on it?
So the licensing controls what someone can do with it, but it doesn't create a funding model for the author. So the issue with open source is there's lots of it, and people do it for all sorts of reasons, and a lot of them are good reasons. The problem is that maintainers are like not obligated to or authors are not obligated to maintain them. So you get abandoned packages, you know, things that don't get maintained or updated, and those become a risk. And really what we want to do is, at least within our ecosystem, we want to find ways through the foundation to support developers or adopt projects so that we can maintain things that we all depend on. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you so much. And again, feel free to reach out to Dan. You find him here as well in between the breaks. Always the most important time for socializing, and just get him directly eye to eye. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.